So thank you all for coming on the maiden voyage of A Conversation With. This is Mitch Clendenning. He's our producer, and I'm Sue Kaufman. I'm the manager of the library. And we've been talking about this, so this is kind of exciting that we're doing this conversation type of thing. And I am very, very, very grateful to Debra Blacklock-Sloan, who is coming along with us for the ride. So what we'll do is we're going to have a conversation with Debra. We're going to go back and forth, got her some questions to ask, and then at the end, we'll ask questions, some very general questions, if you could. You know, I'm researching in this place, and I've got this problem. And then, of course, we can work with you afterwards, you know, all together. And again, thank you all for coming. So, welcome, everyone. And I am very pleased and honored and just happy to introduce my friend, Debra Blacklock-Sloan, who has really helped me in the years that I've been here learn about African-American research. And she comes amazingly. I don't know how she does everything she does, okay?
I'm cloned.
You're cloned. And so Debra, don't we all, yes. Debra is a professional genealogist and historical researcher with over 25 years of experience. She also is a native Houstonian and sixth-generation Texan. There you go, who has traced her paternal ancestral roots to Russ County in East Texas, Alabama, Georgia, Kentucky, and South Carolina. Her maternal ancestors are in the West Indies and Louisiana. And if anyone is passionate about helping people, it's Debra. And she is very passionate about helping African Americans find their ancestors and is genuinely at home in any courthouse. She works her way around libraries, courthouses, historical societies. She's presented at local workshops on African American family research and featured in several newspapers and publications, such as the African American News and Issues, the Houston Chronicle, Houston Defender, the Tray Magazine, the Houston Historical Commissions, the Medallion Magazine, and the Texas Historical Foundation's Texas Heritage Magazine. She's a star of stage and screen, radio and television. We done Great Day Houston segments throughout the years on her own and then together. And she has researched Deborah Duncan's maternal and paternal ancestors. She is a member and a very active member of the Afro-American Historical Genealogical Society, the Willie Lee Gay H-Town chapter, and she's the programming chair this time around. This time around. The Harris County Historical Commission, Harris County African American Cultural Heritage Commission, and the Historical Oak Park Cemetery Board. And I'm sure we could go on and on and on. But anyway, again, I consider Debra a friend who's always willing to help not only me here at the library customers, the customers at the African American History Research Center at the Gregory School, and also at the Houston History Research Center at the Julia Idison Building, and in every other place that we just get her and she'll stop and help you out in the middle of doing her own research.
Thank you,
welcome.
Sue. Thank you, Sue.
I know, because they get to be really long. It's just because we're old.
Yeah, that's right.
And so we have all these obituaries. So, but like I mentioned, we're going to have a chat, and we're just going to, do some research time afterwards. So we're going to start. It's like a job interview, okay? Just like this is the talk show host that I am.
Oh, right.
Ready? Okay. So listen, Debra, tell us, all of us, about how you got started and how your interest in all things historical developed. I mean, how did you get started, and how did you actually become who you are today?
Well, I would say it started off with my elementary school teachers. They nurtured my love for history. And I didn't learn about Black history. I learned about Columbus and everybody else, not knowing that Black people had made contributions. And then later on, I met Willie Lee Gay, who is a noted historic Texas history teacher. I didn't meet her by accident, because there are no accidents. God ordains everything. Yeah. But I met her. I used to work at a middle school. And my colleagues knew that I wanted to do a Black History Museum in Houston because we didn't have one. And one of them came up to me one day and said, "Hey, Debra, they're having a meeting about a Black History Museum." And I went like, "Oh, I'm not going to go." I went back and forth, and I decided to go. And ladies and gentlemen, my late husband would tell you that I'm late for everything. I would be late for everything. But this particular day, I was early, and there was an elderly woman sitting there, and that was Mrs. Gay. We started talking. And before the meeting and after the meeting, she said, "Oh, I like you. You're smart. I'm going to get you in some organizations." I thought, she doesn't even know me. But she did get me into the Historical Commission. She introduced me to Catherine Roberts at the Yates Museum. So all of that, all of those steps is how I became involved in history, entrenched in history. That's a better word, because my background was credit, customer service, showroom furniture display design for 30 years. And then I worked at a middle school because I wanted to be there for my two sons. I didn't want them to be latchkey children. So I said, if I work for the school district, I'm out when they're out. I can attend their activities. And they put me in the library, of all places. Okay? I mean, they could have put me anywhere.
It was God
and I didn't know
ordained.
where I was going to work. And they put me in the library. And I'm like, oh, I love libraries. That worked. And so I was at the middle school for like 12 years. I was helping children with history fair. That happens every year. So it all worked together. And then later I started working for the Yates Museum. I was volunteering with them. And my son said, "Mom, why are you volunteering with them?" I said, "Because I love what I do and it's passion. I'm passionate about it." He said, "But you're not being paid." I said, "I don't have to be paid because I love doing it." And so like a year or two later, the director said, "I want to hire you to be our historic research director." I'm like, "Okay." And she says, we can only pay you $40 an hour." I'm thinking, oh, that's fine. Only $40 an hour? Sure. I mean, it's okay. So I started working for them. And so, but before I left, you guys, I kind of floundered back and forth because I love working with the school district. I didn't want to leave the children. I love working with the students. My husband said, "Deb, you've been wanting to do this all your life. Now here's a chance." I said, "I know, but I want to work for the school." He said, "But you have a chance to work on your own." And so I left. And so it worked out because my husband ended up having brain cancer. And so had I worked for the school, I wouldn't have had any time to be off. And so it worked out. It worked out because I could work when I got ready. But anyway, that's how I got here.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well,
No, that's a long way around, but
No, but I mean there were some interesting things in that whole explanation was is you did not set out to be who you are.
No, I did not.
Right, and through the kindness and divine intervention, if you will,
absolutely,
you became who you are.
Right.
But you self-taught.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah. Avocational.
That's right. That's right. And so being self-taught is I think something that that we can talk about here,
Sure.
and trying to find these resources and learning what it is that we have,
Right,
and
right.
how it is. And so, do you consider yourself a genealogist or a historical researcher? What actually would you, if someone said to you, what actually is your vocation, if you will? What actually, a detective?
I would say I'm a detective. People call me a historian, but I don't know everything, but I know what I know. And I am a lover of history, so I would say I'm a detective. My friends say if it's under a rock, Deborah's going to find it. That's my reputation. And so I would say I'm a detective and a lover of history, if you will.
So a level of tenacity and
Right.
being able, and this is, I think, for those of you, I mean, a lot of you who know Debra here, and I mean, just the innate curiosity and the innate not letting go of something and trying to find out.
Yes.
And so when you learned about, number one, I mean, obviously Texas was a very strong love of yours,
Yes,
right? And
yes.
so learning about that and just immersing yourself in history.
Yes, absolutely.
So studying history along with your personal family, and then of course now everybody else that you work on, is something that needs to be done, correct?
Yes, it is. It is, yes. And I met my, another reason I got started in genealogy is I met my paternal great-grandmother and my great-aunt. And so when I saw my paternal great-grandmother, she reminded me of a Native American. And I thought, she doesn't look like my Creole grandmother. She was tall and wiry, and I have her cheekbones and her structure. And so when I met her in January of 1989 on a cold, gray winter day, I remember exactly, I met her and I interviewed her. Instead of talking with people my age, I started interviewing her and her daughter. And that was on a Saturday. On that following Monday, I came to Clayton Library and started researching. that following Monday. Yeah, just from meeting her, because I didn't know anything about her, and my mother said I might have seen her as a child, but as an adult, when I saw her, I went like, who is this lady? Why does she look like this? And I was very, very curious about her. And my aunt's sister, who I really resemble. Black people have an aunt sister in their family, don't they? Yeah, yeah. So this is my other inspiration right here for researching.
So when you begin, and I mean, we all have these documents and these type of things at home, and so the stories that come with these things are the things that sort of with the stuff is what I call it, really. Yeah. With the stuff is what began and makes you begin to think about what part of your family history you're going to work on. So in addition to these kinds of things, what kind of documents or evidence or history stories do you think are most important?
Well, I think the types of stories that are important is just a personal history of what my ancestors went through. And so again, when I interviewed them, they were telling me where they came from, when their parents were born and where they were from. So just interviewing them, which is something we have to do. A lot of times our ancestors don't want to talk about the past because it's painful and it's shameful because of slavery. And so we have to respect that. But I always say there's a paper trail and you can go around them. So you have to respect that. But I mean, but you want to interview them and learn as much as possible. There are the family Bibles, that we have in our family that record birthdays, death dates, marriages, what they grew that year, that kind of thing, the crops, all of that stuff. So the family Bibles, but again, those special documents that are around the house that we just take for granted. Absolutely.
And it's interesting when you talk about interviewing those that are around. I think turning it around and interviewing ourselves also is just as important, in going through our documents and organizing those things, because the knowledge that we have in our heads and the stories that we heard, remember, we become ancestors.
Right.
And if we don't share those stories, then are we just as not very far removed from those that did not share their stories prior to us?
Right.
I don't want to say. Yeah. So in doing that, so really it's a matter of researching, once you get those stories and looking for what's in. And then, you talked about coming to Clayton, and of course, so when you come, what is one of the first things that you do when you come here, if not before you get here?
Yeah, well, first, when I walk in the door, it's like magical. The carpet is magical. I know that doesn't make sense, but it's magical because I think about what's in this library. And when I first started, which is in BC, before Christ or before computers, you pick one. I just stayed here all day, and my late husband would say, "Your friends calling." I told him, "You out looking for dead people," and so I would just stay here all day because there's so many resources here that you could look at, and I would sit on the floor in between the shelves. I know I'm not supposed to, but I would sit on the floor and make myself at home. At home, not supposed to block the owls, but that's what I would do because of of the resources that are out there.
And how did you become familiar with the resources that were here?
Well, I asked the staff, the wonderful staff over the last, since 1989, I would ask them. And they knew me because I'd come in and say, "Hey, I need to look at this," or "Where can I find this?" And so the staff would help me with that. And so I'd make a list of everything I was going to do before I came, so I'd be organized. You always want to make a list of what you're going to be looking for, so that when you approach the staff, you want to say, "I'm looking for this, I'm looking for that."
And you want to prepare. You want to look at what you have and plan your attack, because even though you step on this magical carpet,
I didn't know my ancestors were enslaved, because after I met my great grandmother, I went right to 1870. I didn't go backwards. I went right to 1870 because I was so excited. But again, I didn't know my ancestors were enslaved. You invited Tony Burroughs out, and he talked about the phases of genealogy. And one of those was finding your enslaved ancestors and finding them in a record. And that really changed my life. In
the 1970s, there were solicitations to members of the community to write biographies. And so we have a lot of them by county. And that would be one place to start, is what Debra was showing. And those are the two Russ County ones that we pulled for her. One is a pictorial history, and one is we call those mug books. And, of course, with everything else, they're taken with a grain of salt. And everybody here has the decision of whether they want to track down these documents or whether we want to, take what we're reading in these books and create a family story. We're not up here to say which is right. It's a personal decision, and it can be very difficult to do, especially when you talked about going to 1870 and then going backwards.
Absolutely.
So,
absolutely.
but trying to find, it's always from what we know to what we don't know, and jumping into 1870 was tough for you, right?
It was.
Right.
I just, I thought you just researched the 1870 and that was it. Because again, I didn't know my ancestors were enslaved. I never saw it in history books. I didn't know that.
What other kind of books do you think that are important to look at that you brought in?
Well, so again, if we're talking about, locating your enslaved ancestors, so No Land, Only Slaves by these two women who went around to the county courthouses in Texas and Louisiana. They recorded transactions of enslaved people being sold. So you want to look at these books. You also want to look at marriage records for your ancestors as well. And I don't have my glasses on, so I'm grabbing. For my Creole grandmother, Father Hebert, which is a great resource. You guys use this. This is a great resource. Just lots of vital information. Donald Hebert. He recorded, this is Southwest Louisiana Records, vital records. And so he's got about, 500 volumes, maybe 50 volumes,
Yeah, there's a lot.
starting from 1850s. And so I found my maternal side listed in here. This is a great resource as well, one of the great resources. It's Father Hebert, Southwest Louisiana Records, and we'll leave this on the table so you can look at them. But this is one of my great resources as well to use when I first came here. Also, I like to use, the city directories. Clayton has city directories because you want to know if you're researching here or somewhere else, you want to know where your ancestors lived. So city directories as well. My friends call me a map nut, and so I know there's a book on here about maps. But you want to look at the land grants that your enslavers, that show where your enslavers purchased land, because again, where the enslavers are, that's where your ancestors are. So you want to look at these resources as well. But again, I think, but again, so these are the main resources that I used, when I came here.
And when we're getting back to, so really working back to 1870, I mean, there's a lot of things. There's like the migration up north,
Right.
up into Michigan and things like that. So you
Right.
really have to study history in
That's
between
right.
1950 and 1870.
Right.
And then you also have to study the history from 1870 and back too. So you really
Right.
have to spend some time doing that. And so in working with yourself and backwards, talk a little bit about the importance of, you talked about jumping right to 1870. Talk about the methodology that made you realize that really jumping to 1870 wasn't the thing to do.
Right. So again, you do want to know where your ancestors were. So knowing the time, what was happening, that helps you with the footprint of your African American ancestor. Because I have an ancestor who was part of the Great Migration. They went to California because it was so rough here in the South, and then some people went up north or whatever. But you do want to study all of that. You want to study the African diaspora. You want to study Reconstruction. You want to study slavery. You want to study the African civilization. All of that to know exactly how slavery happened. You want to know. You want to get to know. Become familiar with all of those resources as well. But again, like Sue said, I jumped to 1870 simply because I just wanted to get there. I didn't want to go. I think at the time, it's 1920, census was released. I jumped right to 1870, and I saw Sim Blacklock, and it was like I hit the lottery. I said, there he is, right there. He doesn't even know me, and I love him. He was right there in black and white. And so again, because I didn't know my ancestor was enslaved, finding the enslaver is a tough job. You've really got to study where the family was. You've got to use different resources to counterbalance the other one. And as Sue said, what they put in the books is their opinion. But in this book, everything they said was true. Everything that they talked about the family was true. And that's how I was able to track my enslaved ancestors.
What if, and it's interesting that you didn't know that there were enslaved individuals. Okay, so then how did you discover that there were enslaved individuals?
Well, what I did was Tony Burroughs gave us a formula to use. So he said that when you find your ancestor in 1870, what you want to do is look 10 pages above and 10 pages beyond your ancestors to see if there's anybody who has that surname. Well, I did that for several years, and I couldn't find anybody. And so I let it alone. And one day, I had been researching for hours and hours, and I said, oh, I give up. And I went to bed. And I promise you, my ancestor woke me up. And I jumped up, and my husband said, what's the matter? What's the matter? I said, I just thought of something. He went like, oh my God, dead people again, right? So I go downstairs, I promise, true story, I go downstairs, turn on my computer, I go back and look at the 1870 census. I'm looking at this, and so where my family is listed on the census, there's 3 family of Strongs. Their last name is Strong, and my families were residing right between them. And I said, no, it couldn't be. The answer was here the whole time. So I go back and look at the 1860 slave census for Rusk County, and they have tons of enslaved people. I said, it's just no way. I went back to 1850, the same thing, more enslaved ancestors. So I go to the family history books. It tells me where the Strong family came from, how long they had been in Texas, all of that. So my husband and we decided to do a Green Book trip. Y'all know what a Green Book trip is, right? You know, Rusk County courthouse is like 3 hours away, right? So I fry chicken, make potato salad. Y'all know how it goes, right? We drive up to Rusk County, and the index for that is in this book here. There was a page in here. So it listed John Strong's name, the year he died, but no day. So I copied this. So one of the staff gave me this book. I copy it, and I take this down to Rusk County, and I hand it to the county clerk just as proud. She looks at it, and she goes, we don't have anything. And I said, yeah, but there's a name and a year here. She said, yeah, but there's no date. And I said, but, are you sure? She goes, yeah. And meanwhile, my husband is looking at me like, like we drove up here for nothing. So we stand there looking at each other. So finally, I head back to the car. You guys, it was a quiet ride home. Very quiet. You know what I'm talking about, don't you? Okay, it was a quiet ride home. So a few weeks later, I came back to the library and I said, look, I showed them this piece of paper and they told me there was no record. And Becky said, no, there's got to be something, Deborah. Go back. So I get the courage to tell my husband. I said, honey, we're going to go back to Rusk County. He said, for what? They don't have anything there. I said, no, there's something there. It's got to be. I said, my ancestor is telling me that. Is your ancestor going to drive you up there? So I convinced him to do one more Green Book trip, and we get up there. I give the clerk, this is a different clerk this time. I give her the piece of paper. She looks at it. She goes, I'll be right back. So I'm thinking, lady, please save my marriage. Please save my marriage. So she comes back, you guys, and I'm waiting. It seemed like forever and ever. She comes back with a big volume. And I'm going like, oh, my gosh. She turns to the page, to the probate for John Strong. And I'm going through it. It's 15 pages. I'm going through it. Okay, where are they? And they're on the last page, the inventory. And I said, oh, my God. And I do the hallelujah dance, and I tell my husband, told you.
There you go.
So,
there you go. Yeah.
And so it was, so your gut and your ancestors will never fool you. I mean, you follow your gut, because I couldn't rest. I kept saying, there's got to be something. And it was there. And that county clerk didn't even try to go in the back and look. She just looked at it and said, we don't have anything. And had I been thinking about it, I would have said, let me talk to your supervisor. Had I been thinking, but I was just so shocked that she said there was nothing without even checking. So the goal is to be persistent, follow your gut. And this, let's see, let me pick it up. This is the will and inventory and appraisement. I'm going to pass this around. And I hope I'm not interrupting the taping. So pass it around. So you have to be persistent. Your ancestors want you to find them. Mm-hmm. So you guys have been chosen. You didn't ask for it, but you've been chosen to be the griot, the history teller of the family, to keep the history. I tell my grandchildren, they know who their ancestors are on both sides of the family. So I used to, I would give them money to say, who's your great-grandmother, who's your great-great? So now they're slick. Now, Nene, can you quiz us? I'm like, oh, you're trying to make money.
Yeah, there you go.
I got it. So now even my grandchildren, they know who their ancestors are. And I tell them about their late grandfather. And so they know all about that, because we have to keep the stories alive. Mm-hmm. We have to. So that is your charge. Find your ancestors, document them, and pass it on to somebody, because I'm not going to be here forever. So I'm passing it on to my nieces so they can keep the story alive.
Yeah, you have to, and that's why when I brought out the what you call it's the clipboards, and we talk about writing our story and writing our family. It's as simple as really just saying, I want to write about using a clipboard. I want to write about Debra has told all kinds of stories, just little tiny pieces, and we know a lot about her now just from listening. So, just like working on our family history is huge. We pick a person that we want to work on. So writing a story, is just 3 paragraphs, because again, we become ancestors, and we don't want to be cursed at, because
right. Oh yeah.
And the money seems to work too.
Yeah.
The money seems to work.
The money works. Yeah.
Because that nobody just wants to look at a pedigree chart. Everybody wants those stories, and leaving it in a format that's going to be interesting to people also. It doesn't have to be a big writing format, but leaving it electronically. I mean, my husband put together a PowerPoint presentation, and we sat there on the couch while his daughter was there, and I just asked questions, and he talked about all those slides on the PowerPoint presentation. So it's interesting that you talked about using an index from here.
Right, yeah.
So some of the material that we have here might not necessarily be the answer, but it will lead you to places, and there's plenty of things like that on the shelf, right?
Right, absolutely, absolutely, yeah. And the other thing I did, Sue, you guys, was about 2005, I reached out to a black doctor who had my surname. He was in the phone book. He was local. And so I was brave enough to pick up the phone and go, hey, I want to find out if your ancestors enslaved mine. So this particular day I called Dr. Blacklock. He was at a doctor's conference. And so his secretary answered, and I said, hi, I'm Debra Blacklock-Sloan. I don't want any money. This is not a joke.
Right.
I'm just trying to find out if Dr. Blacklock and I have a connection. And so she said, I'll take your information and give it to him. And I said, she's not going to call me back. He won't call me back. Well, 2 weeks later, because I had call ID, the phone rings, and I go like, oh my God, he called me back. And he said, Miss Blacklock-Sloan, this is Dr. Joe Bob Blacklock. I got your message. He said, as a matter of fact, I was in South Carolina at a doctor's conference, and I stayed in the Blacklock house. I said, oh, wow. Because the College of Charleston had bought the house. It's still standing. And he said, and they told me to go to the courthouse and do some research, blah, blah, blah. And I did find some information. He even had some enslaved information. So he said, we have a historian in the family. I'm going to send you the family history. And I said, okay. Wow. So he did send me the family history, you guys. And I wish I didn't think to bring it. So I'm just going to say that it was this thick. And my ancestors were in there. The ones from Charleston and Maryland and Virginia were listed in there because they'd listed all of the families. So it was in a book this thick, I promise you. I forgot to bring it. And so I say that to say, it's an uncomfortable conversation when you approach a white person about, about your ancestors being enslaved. But he was very receptive. And so we even did a documentary called Blacklock together where we both talked about my journey, and he was in it. And so we both decided that, okay, I can't hold you responsible for what your ancestors did. All we can do is acknowledge it and get along with each other. That's all we can do. And so he still keeps up with me. As a matter of fact, I spoke at the DRT about 3 weeks ago. He came out and supported me. And when I introduced him, people did double takes. When they saw him, he said, yeah, we're distant cousins. His DNA has a little bit of Ghana in it. So he was very amenable to the idea of sharing his history with me. And so, I was very blessed that happened because, some people don't want to share that. But, we just want to find out about our ancestors. We don't mean any harm. But if our ancestors were enslaved by a white person, we just want to find out, do you have the information? And that's where we are with that.
Right,
but,
it's just all the curiosity of family.
Yeah, that's history.
Right, it's all just the curiosity.
Right.
And we have family histories upstairs on the second floor. We have about 15,000 family histories upstairs that are alphabetical by surname. And then also, if you use Family Search, and you go to Family Search and you click on Search, and there in the drop-down menu, there's a link there that says Books. There's almost 600,000 books there that you can search by surname, where you very well might find some of those family history books.
Right.
And so,
I've used them for some of my clients. I've used them. No, they were on the second floor. So,
So you just don't know, I mean, you're just going to want to try and find out, what it is that you can. And then, like, again, it's all part of history. I think that was one of the oddest, I don't want to say oddest, but very different things. I'm from Illinois, and I did family history as a librarian up there for, I've been here almost 20, so probably about almost 20 years up north, too. And the research down here with African American research is very different than the research up north, of course. Well, the majority of, the Northern African Americans, came in and are free people of color, all along. And down here, we're talking about enslaved researchers. And that was, I will say, for me, having to, learn how to say, are we talking about enslaved families?
Right.
I mean, just, that matter of a fact type of thing had to come, for me too, and just a whole bunch of different research. So we want to have time for questions too, but let's talk about, so we talked about the family histories that we have upstairs. You talked about some of the county histories, and the only land, land. What is it called?
Only land. No land, only slaves.
No land, only slaves. I want to mention to you that the handouts that we have, one of those is, if you remember Franklin Smith, who worked here, who wrote a book on doing African American history. I took his handout, and he has it there where he talks about the resources that we have here for African American research. It's mostly Texas, but remember, you can take that information and apply it to where you're researching also. Right. And then we have a display out in front there that Melissa did. The other handout is on black farmers, which I thought was interesting also. But in knowing that, what kind of, I suppose, if you were going to come up with maybe one or two collections that you should not miss here, like, the super cool ones, and then even maybe one at Gregory or two at Gregory, and talk about the other special collections units that we have. So, what would you recommend to really look at if we're talking about enslaved families?
Well, you know what? This 1867 Texas voter registration. So this is a registration of all voters, black and white, in the county, and this information tells you when your ancestor arrived in Texas. It may be off a little bit, but two of my ancestors are in here. This is Rusk County. So you want to look at that, in addition to these books. But first you want to document when they came. So this documents when they came, and the family and the county history books document when they came. And so this is very cool because it's the name of your ancestors, how long they've been in the state, the county, and the precinct. And obviously, there's no signature. It'll say his mark, and it'll say colored on the end. So this was very vital to me because it gave me a snapshot as to when my ancestor came into town. I also looked for the enslaved person, and so the years were just right on time, a year or two off, because remember, they're coming with the enslaver. So when you look at both, when you look for your ancestor and the enslaver, it's going to be right there, in the same county as well. I was fortunate. A lot of times the enslaver will move to an adjacent county, or our ancestor will move to an adjacent county. But in this particular instance, they were still in Rusk County. So the 1867 Texas voter registration is something else that documents, again, when your ancestor came to the state, if you're researching Texas.
Anything at Gregory? So let's look at our sister units.
Well, I spend more time here, but don't tell them. I love the Gregory School. I spend more time here.
I will say, if you haven't been to the Gregory School, you really should go. They have a display. Newspapers, funeral programs, and some other things too. So that's and then the other sister unit, which is the Houston History, the Houston History Research Center. We just went through branding.
Oh, they changed it.
Different
Okay.
names.
Okay.
Yeah, it used to be the Houston Metropolitan Research Center, but now it's the Houston History Research Center at the Julia Idison Building. That is the local side of.
Could you say that again, please?
It's the Houston History Research Center at the Julia Idison Building. That's the archival side of Houston and mostly Houston history. And let's talk about the difference between our collections and some of the collections that they have at Gregory and HMRC and the archival side. Talk about using manuscripts and archives.
So I basically used manuscripts manuscripts and archives at the I'll call it the HMRC.
That's fine.
And so again, local history, Sanborn maps. I'm trying to remember what else. More histories there as well. But again, city directories as well. So I used a lot of that. But the manuscripts on different families or whatever. That's my second place that I love there because they know me up there too. Brace's maps, Brace's block book maps. I use all of that. But any of the maps, all of that collection is what I use there if I'm doing local history. If I'm doing local history for somebody who's trying to find somebody who lived here in Texas, or in Houston rather.
And business.
And businesses.
So in an archival collection, you'll run into those papers that might be business histories or church histories, where you're getting actually those actual physical document historical stuff. That's an archive side. We're published material here. We have some funeral records upstairs. But that's also a difference. So when you're doing research, whether it's here or whether it's at your location, you're going to want to try and find archives because, especially with the enslaved research, you might find family papers someplace else.
That's true, yeah.
And sometimes by name you're going to look by family papers, but then sometimes the geographic location is even just as important, correct?
Right. And I failed to mention they have newspaper articles and photographs, which is really cool. Sometimes they'll go in the back and they come back, there are photographs in there, pristine black and white photographs, and I would just lose my mind every time they come back with the folder because you never know what was going to be in there, but always something you can use.
Sometimes also a little difference in using archival collections, again, whether here or at your location, is calling first. In a published book with open stacks, the browsing is super simple. You're just going to go right to your collection, or your area and do that. When you have stuff that's in closed stacks and in archives, it's important, even more so important, to engage the professional, the information professional there, so they can help you work with what it is that you're looking for. And as Debra mentioned earlier in the courthouse, when you talk to one person, it's always good to talk to more than one person, even all of us here. And so just quickly, we talked about historical context. What was probably one of the coolest finds that you found in, I know there's a lot of things that you've discovered, whether it's your own research or for somebody else, that you were really happy about finding, or was hard to find? Yeah,
well, I'm just going to have to go back to this county history because, again, it's very vital to finding your enslaved ancestor. And again, the 1867 Texas voter registration as well. Again, you have families who published information on their families in the stacks, along, by county. So you have individuals who are publishing individual information. So you just have to go through there, or either what I do is I go in the catalog and put in the county and just scroll through to see what they have. So, so it's just a myriad of resources here that you can use. And again, you just make yourself at home, and, which is what I do when I come. And so I can say as long as I want to now.
I think that's super important, making yourself at home. That's what we want you. I think all of us that work with everybody, that's what we want you to feel. We want you to feel that you can go to the stacks, pull off everything that you want, put it on a cart because we count it. I know it's counterintuitive not to put it back where you got it from, but we count them. So that's super important, even if you're sitting on the floor. And we are here to help you. And so that's why, probably a big takeaway is before you walk onto the magic carpet, get a little organized.
That's right, be organized. Document where you find all of your resources. There are some forums on Ancestry and maybe Family Search where you can, document what you're looking for and where you found it. So you won't have to keep repeating the same thing, repeating your steps. You want to do that. Again, focus on one family at a time. And then if you get stuck, work on another family. But believe me, your ancestor will tell you when to go back. My ancestor told me when to go back and look at that 1870 census because I'd seen it for years. And just said, I'm not going to find the slaveholder. But your ancestors will never, they want you to find them. They really do. They really do.
Well, that's wonderful. So you ready for some questions?
Oh, sure.
Okay.
Sure.
Anybody have any questions? Or come on.
Yeah, so at our genealogy, during our meetings, we have about
Talk about, yes.
Oh, yes.
Yes, okay.
Yeah, so
Yes,
I believe, so
please.
again, Sue mentioned the genealogy chapter that we belong to, and Sue has been very gracious in collaborating with us on different events. And thank God you brought Tony Burrows in and Deborah Abbott in as well. And so we meet on the second Saturday of every month from 10:30 to 12:30. We're going to be in person, hopefully in April, and we're trying to get, I don't know if you know Frank Heredia with the Harris County District Clerk. Oh, talk about some cool records here.
Okay.
So he's gonna be here.
Great.
Yeah. So,
Great.
but again, 10:30 to 12:30, we have a presenter who comes on, who shows us tips and techniques on how to research your ancestor. And then, we always ask people, anybody have any questions? But we know people are stuck.
Right.
We know people are stuck because I was stuck. So, and we encourage you to log on to our meetings. And so if you're interested, you've signed on, and we are OGS.org, I think. I have to remember, So I'll give you the Facebook information. But we are the Willingly Gay Afro-American Historical and Genealogical Society. And again, we know our whole goal is to help you research your ancestor and to document the African-American footprint in Texas, which is very important to us.
I think all of you sitting in this room know the importance of networking and education. And I can remember when I first came, there was like 6 people, the African American group, and they would meet in this little tiny room.
Oh, yeah.
We just kept saying, and the best thing that you can do is be with birds of a feather, and the best way to learn and to further your research. So, any questions yet? Aha! Yay!
Okay. I'm not sure if I heard you correctly.
Okay.
But I think you said that you've have some family members from Alabama.
Well, Alabama, Kentucky, Georgia, because if you think about the culture of slavery and how they sold persons of African descent, they might give them to a daughter or son as a wedding present, and that son might move away, that kind of thing. That's why people say, oh, you look like my sister, my aunt, my niece. And I say, well, it's because the culture of slavery separated us. And they look at me and they go like, okay.
So I have a question about Alabama.
Okay.
I have traced the slave owner. I've traced my second great grandmother. She was enslaved.
Okay.
And I've traced to the plantation. I got that through the last will and testament of the slave owner who died before slavery ended. And she was one of 4 children, all on the plantation, and her mother, my third great grandmother, were there. So I have located my second great grandmother, and through Ancestry DNA, so if you guys
I was
able to locate what happened to one of her siblings. Okay? And I actually got a photograph. I had pictures of my second great grandmother from my grandmother and my dad and so forth. But I actually located one of her siblings who lived to be 1 month shy of her 105th birthday.
Wow.
Okay, and so when she turned 100, local newspapers were writing articles every year. So that confirmed a lot of my information.
Yeah.
But I cannot find my third great grandmother, and I cannot find the other 2 siblings. So my husband and I, we're going to Troy, Alabama.
All right.
Troy, Alabama this summer.
Right.
And I need some tips on, what exactly do I look for? I've looked through Ancestry, I've looked through Family Search, I've looked through documents, and I have not been able to find anything on my third great grandmother or the siblings from 1870 or beyond.
Okay, so, and you made me think about something when Sue asked me about something interesting. So there are plantation records, books with plantation records in them, where they've recorded the name of the enslaved. They gave them blankets, they gave them food or whatever. So they have those books here as well, plantation records, and they're well documented. Not in every state, but if you're fortunate enough to run into that, but you might want to check with the Alabama archives and see if they have some information. Again, so when you go up there, be prepared when as to what you're looking for. But I would check with the archives, and a lot of times I'll call before I go, and I'll ask, do you have this? Because a lot of times that pesky courthouse fire. They've had 3 fires, and so the records are gone. But I would call them and specifically ask for those records, what you're looking for, and maybe there are some plantation records. And a lot of times you can look in the newspapers where they are advertising plantation sales of certain individuals, again, if that was recorded in the newspapers. I've seen that before. That's some cool stuff that I've seen. But again, look for books where they might have published a plantation. The state archives might have something on the planter as well, especially if they were very prominent. So you could do that. But I would call the Alabama archives before I went up there. And Alabama's not around the corner, so I would call.
But Troy, for those that may not know, Troy, Alabama is
Montgomery.
right outside of Montgomery.
That's right, Montgomery
has a lot of history.
Yes, they do.
And we want to go because when I found out what happened to my second great grandmother, and this is such an interesting find and story, the slave owner was going to take my second great grandmother's sister to the auction block. She was 16 years old. They were going to sell her off the plantation. And the day before he was to take her to the auction block, he was checking his mule, getting everything ready. He got kicked in the chest and died a few days later. And so she was never sold off the plantation. She did run away shortly after that because this was all in between 1860 and 1863. So it was before the end of slavery. Okay. And so that's how I got a lot of information because they were inventory, they were property, part of the last will and testament. But it was such an interesting story that I found it and I was able to confirm it through newspaper records. So I had found the information, but I needed to confirm it. I needed a source. And that confirmed it because she would retell the story each year in the newspaper. And it was such a find.
Wow.
Such a find. And the way I found that, this is more interesting, the way I found it through Ancestry is because when I get a DNA connection, I don't check all of them, but something told me my ancestor probably led me to contact.
That's right.
It was a cousin, a distant cousin in Las Vegas. And he had some records because he and his wife had been researching. He had a copy of a letter that my second great grandmother had written to his grandmother from 1935, and she was talking about a family reunion at her sister's house in Michigan. It did not give the name, it just gave an address. I contacted the state of Michigan for tax records because it was a house, and I found out it was the aunt's daughter's home that lived there, but when I traced all of that, that was how I found her, and I contacted her. And I just want to say one last thing. Time is of the essence.
Yes, it is.
I made the contact with my cousin. He was 88 years old. All of this happened in the midst of COVID.
Oh, wow.
And I made contact. We kept in contact for about 5 to 6 months, and we would call. And then I got a note in the mail, and he told me, he says, I lost your number, give me a call. I've been in the hospital, and my wife is still in the hospital. And his wife died 2 days after I got the letter. He died 1 week after that. So if I had not been in contact with him, I would have never gotten all that information.
Yeah, you're right. Your time is of the essence because of COVID. I mean, people are they're leaving here.
Yeah.
So that is important. The other thing you made me think of is that the slave ship manifest.
Okay.
The slave ship manifest from New Orleans, and then the other segment, they have that here, the southeast wise. So with the slave ship manifest, we know slavery they shouldn't have been importing Africans, but they were. But you want to check there. So I found, Sue, this is back to Sue's question, I found my ancestor, my third great grandfather, listed in the slave ship manifest. And Robinson and Blacklock were the shippers. They were shipping him from South Carolina to Georgia, to New Orleans. And so from New Orleans, now, we don't know how they got to the States. They would have been walking, not in any wagons. The slaver would have been in a wagon or whatever, on a boat, but they wouldn't have been on horseback. So once they came from the north, or they shipped them from the south up to New Orleans, they could have been sold at the port. So that's real picky, but slave ship manifest for New Orleans and for the southeast coast. Check those. Yes, Carlotta?
I have a question about Waller County and their historical society. My father's family, they're from Waller County.
Okay.
And so I'm always trying to find information to help that part of her family. And now when I get on Ancestry, hints will try to send me in the direction of the Historical Society, which is closed. And I'll try to call and, I'll get this message that says, we're closed because of Harvey. Please get back with us later. And, well, Harvey was 5 years ago.
Right.
Do you all have any ideas as to when or if?
You might want to go to the Waller County Courthouse. I've done a lot of research in Waller County. And I met with the Historical Commission. You might want to call them because that's a beautiful white building in Waller County. The Historical Society was there in Waller County. So they probably are closed, but check with the Waller County Courthouse and see if you can find some information there. That's where you want to research, at the courthouse.
I know I'm there already.
Oh, you have? Okay,
Yeah,
okay.
I don't know. I've tried it.
Okay, okay. Well, then the books they have on the history of Waller County would help as well.
The courthouse might know what happened.
Oh,
with the
yeah.
Historical Society.
Yeah.
So you call on the phone.
Yeah, that's what I said. Call them. Yeah.
Yep.
Okay.
And ask them where their records
Yeah.
went. Yes. So.
Yes.
Can we find some of the names of slave ships that came into Galveston? Because I had a great uncle
Uh-huh.
who was a merchant seaman, and he did some research on the East Coast, and he said we had a great grandmother named Betsy Burke.
Okay.
So when I Googled it, only 3 names came up from that era. So with that,
So she was enslaved?
yeah.
So again, the slave ship manifest. You want to put her first name in there and where she would have come from. And what happens is, what populates is the name of the shipper, where that person is being sold to, and the name of the person who bought her. So you want to look at the slave ship manifest.
And those are on Ancestry.
On
and,
Ancestry.
and Family Search.
Yeah. Again, I found my 3rd great grandfather listed there. Super fine.
Now, when you use Ancestry or Family Search, there is a way to search an exact collection. So on Ancestry, you can click Search and then put a name in. Or if you click Search, there's a drop-down menu that says Card Catalog. You could put in Slave Manifest, and it'll pull up all those collections. So, which is
Question about the slave manifest. So when you go into that, to the slave manifest, do you have unique identifiers in there? Because I had my ancestors, their names were pretty common.
Okay, yeah.
How do you narrow them down to, get?
So once you find out who purchased them, so you look for them, and then hopefully genealogists always hope that the enslaver died before 1865.
exactly.
So the records will be there. We're praying God let them be dead before 1865, right? And so you want to look at probate records to make sure, see if they're listed there. But again, you look at the shipper, look at who purchased that person, and then look for them in the 1860 slave census. And then check the newspapers in case they list those. Sometimes on the newspapers especially, they list the names of the enslaved persons, what their occupation was, and how old they were, because they're selling them because of plantation sales. So the newspapers are really valuable in that aspect. But with the slave ship manifest, again, it's a little bit more research, trying to see who the person was, where they were living, that kind of thing, because slavery was a big business. Big business.
All right, everybody. Thank you all for coming, and
thank you.
and Deborah, thank you
sure.
so much for sharing and for always
absolutely.
being available for us.
Thank you for having me.
well,
I love this place, you know that.
I know you do, and really, and for as busy as you were this month, we appreciate you making the time.
Oh yeah, I wouldn't
today,
have missed
so
it. Thank you.
Thank you so much for
Yeah,
that.
thank you. I appreciate
And
it.
thank you guys for coming.
Thank you.
And one thing I do have to ask you is if you didn't sign a media release, because we did record this, if
Would you say again the local group, because were you part of the presentation over at the Holocaust?
Yes, I did that. Yeah, right, I thought you looked familiar,
No, I didn't make it.
Oh, okay, well, no, you don't look familiar. Okay. Yeah.
Did you come up?
I came in late.
That's okay.
The meeting time that you all get together, you said
10:30 to 12:30. Every second Saturday of the month, 10:30 to 12:30. We're meeting virtually, but next month, in April, we plan to meet in person. We plan to meet here, right? So we plan to meet
As
here.
far as I know.
As far as we know. And so you made me think of something else because I'm sleep deprived. The Freedmen's Bureau, because she said something. The Freedmen's Bureau.
Oh. Yeah.
Check there to see if they, a lot of times you'll see marriages there. You'll see where they did contracts to work with plantation owners. You want to check the Freedmen's Bureau because the program last month, this month, had to do with letters that people wrote to the Freedmen's Bureau looking for their relatives. And one of the presentations had to do with newspapers, how you could locate those ancestors. But the Freedmen's Bureau checking out for marriages, contracts, all of that. And so also the Freedmen's Savings and Loan. I found an ancestor listed in there, and it listed his father's name, his mother's name, his siblings' name. He was coffee colored, and I wondered what color that was. It was coffee colored, his age and where he'd come from, who he was working for. So the Freedmen's Bureau Savings and Loan, that's another valuable. I found that when I came here. So check those out. I mean, just so many resources, you guys. So many. Yeah, that's on Ancestry, but you can look it up here. And so can I just say something about Ancestry? I'm not trying to bash them. So I use Ancestry because I have a business. So it used to be $99, and so now it's gone up to $243 a year. So if you come here, you're going to save some money. I'm just saying.
December, you can get it for half price.
And half price, yeah. But again, it's astronomical now, and you know they even charge tax. And so, but again, if you come here, you can use Ancestry all day long. You can use Fold 3 all day long. Okay, all of those other resources for free because those subscriptions they cost. I spent about at least close to $400 with newspapers, Ancestry.com, and Fold 3.
That's okay.
So you know because I use it at home.
It's all right. Don't worry. Did you come from the rodeo?
A retreat.
Get this. You get these. With the marathon. All right.
So, say again. I didn't get the last part.
One was a Houston resident
Okay.
before slavery.
Okay.
Where would you start?
I would look at the slave census because I've done a lot of research here in Houston, and so there is a census on free blacks in Harris County. I think it's 1860 because there were a handful of blacks in Texas. They tried to make them leave. They couldn't decide if they wanted them to stay or not. But, you know, so there's something on that as well. But again, you want to look at that slaveholder. You want to follow the slaveholder and you find your ancestors. Okay, so here in Houston especially, you know, again, you have the city directories of those enslavers, you know, and sometimes that information is published depending on how prominent that person was in the city. Yeah, but again, you know, you want to look for them in newspapers and books. There are several publications here about early Houstonians, and most of them were enslavers. Most, you know, the streets and buildings that are named for them, Rice. So there's information on them in books here.
Great, thank you.
You're welcome.
What's the name of the group that meets?
The Afro-American Historical and Genealogical Society. We call ourselves AHGS for short. AAHGS.
Thank you.
AHGS. Willie Lee Gay chapter. And you could Google that and our Facebook would pop up.
Yeah.
So Afro-American Historical and Genealogical Society - Willie Lee Gay H-Town chapter. And Mrs. Gay is still living. She and I and Karim Rand were the original founders of the chapter 20 years ago. We decided to name it for her. So, which is noteworthy.
I was a member many years ago. We met.
Right. Yeah.
Oh yeah. And again, as Sue said, we would meet in this room, maybe.
See, this used to be divided.
You see how small
up,
it was there? That's how small it was. So we have about 60 members now.
Yep, it's amazing.
It's
amazing.
Yeah.
So it's a great group. It's what you should do. You know, like just like in the old days. You know.
I'm ready to research again.
There you go.
Okay.
All right.
Yeah, I hope you're inspired to. You must.
Yes,
yeah.
ma'am.
And
Thank
it's just
you.
nonstop for me because again, my ancestors don't let me rest. They
are
saying,
media
go look here, go look
forums.
there, or whatever. Yes.
Thank you. Thank you.
Right. Yeah, I have clients. I don't have a website. I'm on the.
Thank you.
I'm on the on a professional website, the Association of Professional Genealogists. So I only do the slaveholder. You know, I'll do whatever you ask me to, but I specialize in looking for the slaveholder.
Okay. And do you have a card?
I do have a card.
That's where I'm stuck.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I have a card.
I'm
Okay.
gonna do a little bit more, but then
Yeah.
after that, I'm like, oh,
Yeah.
maybe I need to reach out.
Yeah. Yeah, but a lot of times, you know what? I always find that if you take a break and then you come back, do what I did. You take a break and you come back and look, and you've overlooked an important item in the document, like I did.
I will also say, you know, Deborah referred to Tony Burroughs. Tony Burroughs is
yeah.
somebody that's been
That's
around
right.
for a long
That's
time.
right.
Back in like the 70s,
Right.
African American research. Now,
Right.
the presentation that you talked about, the 8 or the 7.
Of 7 Faces of Genealogy, right?
He's
That's right.
actually doing that again.
Yeah. He sent me a note.
If you go, if you go out to Google and Google Tony Burroughs, 8 phases.
The 7 Faces.
Seven-
7 Faces of genealogy.
7 phases.
Of
7
genealogy.
phases. He's doing it, I want to say, pretty quickly in the next
The 28th
of March.
of February.
February.
February. Yeah.
But
I'll
if
look at my phone.
Tony is one that you want to learn from. Tony
Right,
Burroughs.
right,
Yeah.
right,
He's from
right.
Chicago. No,
Yeah.
he's in Chicago.
Yeah, and here's his book. His book is called Black Roots. And another favorite of mine, Franklin Carter Smith, he used to work here. You guys know Frank? Dear Frank, he's retired now. So Frank has a book. Tony has a book. So I would, really, when you get stuck, go, refer to these books. They've got some great instructions. They're great. 7 Faces of Genealogy.
yeah.
I think it's, I can't remember. He sent it to me last night. I'm trying to remember.
Yeah, I know he sent it to me
28,
too.
yeah.
I already posted. I reposted
Yeah.
it. Yeah. It's online.
It's $30 to register, but it's
that what it
worth
is?
it. Believe
Okay,
me.
yeah.
Tony's funny.
Tony's funny.
Yeah, and he's very good. Yeah, he is
he's
the
one of the
guru.
oldies of African American research.
Right, he really is. He really is.
Yes.
If the session that you did at the Holocaust Museum, will that be available?
No, they. You know what? I don't know if they recorded it. We wanted to get a copy of it, and so we need to ask them because they were very gracious to us, and we got a lot of publicity from that event as well. Sue gave us the tie-in with the Holocaust Museum, and so it was a great turnout. Don't you think? So it was a great
yeah, it was
turnout, and the
amazing.
Chronicle did a article on the event, and so they were really great. They really were. But I'll ask if we can. We'd love to get a copy of that as well. Yeah. Yes.
And I just want to say, I'm at the point where I'm looking for slaveholders. I've
Okay.
found that, and it's in the East Texas area.
Okay. Hey, cuz.
And my mother's family is buried in a cemetery, and it's one of the cemeteries where the front part was for the white families, and then the back of that is for the African American families.
Okay.
And looking at the research of that cemetery and as to why they now have, like, they call it Part 2. But they've identified slaves, former slaves that
Okay.
were buried in the site. And
Okay.
my great-great-grandmother is one of those that was listed.
Okay.
And so I'm at a point trying to find that slave owner.
Okay. What cemetery is this?
This is Pyland.
Okay, Pyland. I've heard of that.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
And it's there in, I want to say, Avenger.
Okay.
It's, outside of Jefferson.
Mhm.
My family was in the Jefferson.
That's a
area.
great area to research.
I know.
Uh-huh.
It's really
Uh-huh.
a lot of happenings.
Yeah. So again, the steps I did was I found them in 1870, and I know if you found her in 1870. Did you find it? So Frank Carter Smith will tell you, you got to study the whole census, look at the community. Because a lot of times there are other relatives there with a different surname. So again, look at that 1870 census. Look at people who have, and I didn't say this, who have a personal wealth and a real estate wealth. So when I looked at the Strongs, they had a personal wealth of $10,000 and a wealth of $5,000, and so that lets you know they had an enslaved population.
Part of that is finding, our family has 119 acres. It's
Oh,
been in the
wow.
family for
Wow.
115
What a
years. So
blessing.
finding out how my
They got-
great-great-grandmother was able to acquire
Right.
that much land.
Right. Well, two things occurred to me. A lot of times, enslaver, the planter donated land for a church and a school. And a lot of times, depending on their occupation, if they were a brick mason or a carpenter, whatever, you got a skill, so now it's in demand after the war, so you can purchase property faster. So it just depends. So, I mean, so if you've got that much family property, that is a blessing. Yeah, my family were sharecroppers. But I'm still proud of them because they helped build the economy of this country.
Well, that's true.
You know what I'm
That's true.
saying?
Yeah,
So,
I mean,
you know,
yeah,
so they didn't leave, but the people who decided to leave, you know, brave individuals and said, I'm going to strike out on my own to see what freedom looks like. I applaud those people. I applaud them.
Look, everybody should be very proud of their ancestors because
Yes.
everybody had some sort of adversity and everybody helped make this country.
Right.
And
Absolutely.
make us who we are today.
That's true.
Also to the lady, for the property, you can check the Bureau of Land Management, check the land records, and see if you can find
General
out.
Land Office,
This
yeah.
is the title. Not every county
Yeah.
is out
Yeah.
there.
Yeah.
Right up against.
Yeah, a lot of counties are online now, so you could check, you know, do a title search and see when they see how they got it, you know, if it wasn't donated to them.
The
So-
government did issue some land.
So I think our takeaways are perseverance is a big thing.
Yeah. Persistent.
Coming,
Patience.
patience, perseverance, checking out what we have on the shelf, getting involved with the Willie Lee Gay chapter of the African American Historical Genealogical Society Facebook, making sure that you have that, and
Yeah.
you know, educating and coming here and doing this and talking to us and. Continue to come back to our presentations, and thank you so much for coming
Yes.
in property. It
Yeah.
really is nice to see everybody, and that it's
Thank
what
you,
everybody's
yeah.
looking for. So great.
Right.
Anybody have any ideas for conversations moving forward? Call us, and we'll be happy to do this. So if you got any ideas, just you can call and say, "Hey, I got an idea for a program." You can either talk to me or talk to one of us, and they'll get it to me. Okay? All right, you guys. Thank you so much for coming.
Yes, thank you.
We're open for another couple hours, and Deborah,
Yeah.
thank you
Okay,
again.
my
Thank you
pleasure,
again.
My pleasure.